Welcome to Positive Philter with your host, Philip Wilkerson, a podcast that focuses on friends, family, health, and career, with a little self-help along the way. Please join me in this journey for self-improvement, and I hope what I have to share will make you a better person, thus making the world a better place. I hope you enjoy the show. I hope you enjoy the show. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it's Philip Wilkerson back with another episode of Positive Philter. I'm joined by a very special guest, Mr. Sumeet Shrivastava. And I really worked on that. I definitely don't want to embarrass myself on my own podcast, but this gentleman, if you know or follow Mason, is the new incoming president of the Alumni Association. And I just wanted to connect with him on the podcast and also share, some stories about school involvement, school pride. I think I'm going to just call this School Pride, the name of the episode. But before we get into the questions, Mr. Sumeet, can you just give a little introduction to the listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Philip. And I really appreciate you having me. I've enjoyed a lot of our interactions over the years and love everything that you bring to our student population and your professional career, but all the things you do to support everyone around our community. So, yeah, for me, I'm basically a Northern Virginian kid. My parents came over as immigrants from India to kind of further his education down at Chapel Hill. But we moved up here when I was 8 years old, right along Braddock Road, basically. So I've kind of spent elementary school, middle school, high school, pretty much all on Braddock Road. From one end of Braddock Road, and we kept moving further west, kind of got out to Burke, and so went to Robinson across the street from Mason for middle and whatnot. But and then, my dad was like a lot of entrepreneurs, trying to work both ends, right? A lot of time as he tried to kind of make a life for all of us. And ultimately, I was fortunate enough to get into UVA and go over there for my undergraduate. Didn't quite work out like I thought. I've heard you mention on previous podcasts about your collegiate experience being, partying and drinking, and that's kind of how mine went. But there were some significant life events there. I struggled so much that, I ended up leaving without completing my degree. But in the middle of that, ended up with a DUI, which really, really, makes you think about life when you're young. But those things have informed the way you look at the rest of life, and they become those significant events. And I think I mentioned to you in a pre-call, the guiding hand, that it starts, sort of the bigger guiding hand that we all have in our lives in one form or another, and how that sort of moves you forward. But while that was going on, I was watching my parents build and be the founders of really, I think, one of the largest Hindu temples in Northern Virginia which is on Western Fairfax County. While Dad was becoming kind of picking up on the entrepreneur spirit. So you're watching that happen. He ultimately becomes an SBA National Entrepreneur of the Year back in the mid 90s while I was working for him. So really, really cool things. And even for the Clinton administration, led a task force, a White House task force on minority and business minority business opportunities and economic opportunities. And just saw how he gave back. And to be honest with you, that whole experience with my parents, and we all have those, and it was fortunate to be right in the middle of it, I think for all of my siblings and others, really defined the way we saw life as we moved through. But and then followed Dad into the government contracting world. So professionally, that's where I play, and joined him. I think he was saving me, he thought, with all the UVA experience and coming home. I had just gotten married. His company was just taking off in the early 90s, and so I joined him when we were a lot smaller, and then kind of watched his ride and helped support that. And basically got into public sector government contracting, never really gotten out. And that's where I've been now for almost 30 years. Next year will be 30 years. I don't feel like I'm that old, but it'll be 30 years in government contracting.
So that's quite the experience. So, I mean, you touched upon it, but so you left UVA. What was the gap between your experience at UVA and then starting up at George Mason?
Yeah, so it was about 3 years. I basically left in summer of '88, which would have been my graduating year, and then started working for a not-for-profit downtown. And then in '91, March is when I married my wife. Another interesting story, because she's the daughter of one of my dad's best friends from his time in college, who I talked to 3 times on the phone from here to India. And then my dad and I flew over, and within 3 days of meeting her, we're engaged.
Wow.
I come back. And so it was the very traditional Indian, kind of process, and which blew a lot of my friends, minds away, right? When you think about growing up here on Braddock Road and, going to UVA and all the experiences, there were a lot of people wondering what I was thinking. But, we're almost, like I said, 30 years later, 4 kids. It's been pretty cool. But so that 3 years, so I joined Dad soon after getting married. And then really it was the following year, 92, when I started thinking about, all right, I've got to finish that thing at UVA. I got to figure out how to get that done. I know ultimately Dad had that kind of vision a lot of dads have that start companies is, my son hopefully will take over. And so I came to Mason thinking I would start, just explore their new executive MBA program, which is like the Friday, Saturday alternating thing. And it was in startup mode. They were just getting ready to start the second cohort. And I think there was one person that moved away or something, but an opening came up. I had decent GMAT scores. I mean, I killed a lot of brain cells, but I still had decent GMAT scores. And they took like Mason, when you think about the Mason pedigree and the story of innovation and entrepreneurship and everything for the university, they took a chance on me and said, hey, we're willing to waive the undergraduate. You can join this cohort. And really became one of the most significant impacts to my career. And I know we'll talk about that a little bit too. And just kind of to add to that, my wife, when we got married, she had not finished her undergrad in India, and she'd always wanted to be an engineer. So a year later, Mason did the same thing for her. They accepted 2 years of her stuff. They gave her waiver on certain things like with ESOL and other things, and let her in. And she ended up 2 years later, after we'd already had a kid, finishing her undergraduate degree here in what was SITE at the time, but now Volgino.
Nice. And it's funny because we both have different undergraduate experiences, but I think, similar to the kindred spirit is that we kind of found our groove in our graduate programs, which were both Mason graduate programs. And, I think I do pivot or say a lot of my career has been because of my graduate experience at Mason, and it kind of gave me, a jump start to my career. When I know in the moment when I was going through my master's program that I was being transformed as in like, wow, this is like my second chance, at academics. I've always been smart, but as you said, I didn't quite, make myself like work hard. I didn't have a strong work ethic in undergrad, but I took my master's program extremely serious. Was that kind of your second thought too? Like once you got into this cohort, you were like, yo, this is my second chance. I'm going to go all out and all that stuff.
Absolutely. It's funny because that really is exactly how it was. I mean, I had the additional pressure. Now I'm working for Dad. And you gotta, in the work environment, I was having to do extra work because I felt like, hey, I know I'm here because of nepotism, right? I know I'm here because I'm his son, and I wouldn't have this job otherwise. And so you had to work extra hard to sort of, prove yourself. At Mason, it was a little bit similar. I was, because it was an executive MBA program, it was kind of geared towards, mid-career folks, but I was 26. Yeah. So I was 10 years younger than the youngest of the other 24 people. So I actually came in with a huge inferiority complex. Like, okay, I know I need to prove myself, but how do I do it with this group of people and the professors and all that? And I'll tell you, like, about, to your point, came in with fear and this complex, and a semester in, I mean, you're meeting some amazing people. And we know that at Mason, we have a, not throwing any shade, but UVA is a different world, right? Yeah, people that show up in Charlottesville and get the support from their families that they do and all that, that's not what Mason's about, and had never has been. And so just getting to see other people who were working like they were, other family, and I had the young child at the time, and then the professors, and just the support they gave, the accessibility that they allowed. About halfway through, it really just like clicked. Like, okay, I have a chance now, and if I do apply myself and keep applying myself, I can compete. And that's kind of what I was referring to earlier. Is until then, there was always a bit of this chip and inferiority complex in the workforce. But I started realizing I may have something. I mean, there may be some natural instinct, and now the academic piece is closing that
Mm-hmm.
out. And then the people, we're now 26 years later from graduation, 28 years from when I met this other group at 24. There are 6, 7 of us that are still intimately involved with each other this far down the line. We have stayed in touch. Not all of them are even local. But it really became transformative for me and to your point, I think it's a great presentation that it was the clicking of the academic and the professional and everything that came together in that
Right.
graduate program.
And it's, I'm trying to hold myself from having such transference, because that was a similar mindset where, you go into a master's program, not as a stellar undergraduate student, and you see all these stellar students in a graduate program. You're like, yo, they might have made a mistake on these admissions. Let me in. And I don't know if you listen to my earlier episodes. I kind of just went to Mason myself because they didn't have a GRE requirement.
Right.
And I was like, eeny, meeny, and like, yo, let your boy get in. And it was kind of like that too. So everyone was like, I was a 4.0, no. And I was like, oh, okay, cool, great. So that was quite the experience. But then obviously sometimes natural ability to connect with people and my counseling degree, I think, catched up with my academics and my interest. And I was like, okay, I like this. And similar to you.
No, and I see it. I mean, I told you, I have so much respect for what you do, because I see the engagement you have with students online. I see the support and the love you get. I mean, that's how I look at it. I mean, I don't know how you see it, but I can see the love that's the people you work with and the students you work with give back to you. And I mean, there's something special there. So it's, like I said, one of the reasons I always enjoy chatting with you.
Yeah, and so I enjoyed that, and also the same thing too. I think a great part of that program, especially small programs like master's programs, is classes are small and you really see the same people for the whole time. So I really got to know, similar to you, I've stayed in close contact with a lot of people that I got my graduate degree with.
Cool.
So obviously it's a different experience. I think the stereotype, particularly when you said you were in the early 90s, and I was speak to, I graduated a little bit later than you.
Yeah, you can say it.
No, but growing up, particularly for me, Mason was always seen as a commuter school, the community school. And I know obviously it's transformed quite some time. What was the vibe like when you went there? Was it, still in that stereotype or the commuter school? Kind of like, okay, you just go here, but you really don't have a campus life. All those things.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I actually never stepped on campus for my program. So we were out at the CIT building over in Herndon, that little upside down building off the toll road. Like you said, when you're growing up here, I mean, I think I remember referring to it as Turnpike Tech, right? Like growing up and stuff or something like that back in the day. And there was that perspective. I think in the early 90s, we still hadn't quite seen the big, boom, right? I mean, it was getting ready to happen. It was certainly starting. But, for me and really for the executive MBA, I can tell you that a lot of my other cohorts did look at things like George Washington and Georgetown. Some looked down at Darden. I think there was even 1 or 2 that said they had looked at the Wharton School program up in Philly. And I think what we found, and the reason a lot of us ended up at Mason was, obviously, like for a lot of people, it was about proximity, right? The ability, but this is a long time ago where you didn't really do online and you had to get your case teams had to get together physically and things like that. So there was an element of proximity, but I think you could start to see the light a tiny bit, right? That the university was starting to step up a little. And just the fact that we had an executive MBA program and it was relatively new, but you could tell the professors. I mean, we had rock star professors. When I started researching it, and you're saying, okay, we've enticed some really cool, great people to show up at this university, despite being just a little bit removed from the idea of a commuter school or in a community kind of enhanced community college. And there was actually, I think a lot of people thinking that we're placing a bet that part of this, and it's one of my, when we talk about alumni engagement, I think it's one of the major reasons. We placed a bet that for a slightly lower cost point and proximity and whatnot, but with what we envisioned and saw was a pretty solid academic curriculum, right? And capability set that we were placing a bet that that degree was going to be worth more sometime down the line, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you could have gone to Wharton, could have gone to Darden, and sort of put that on your resume, but there was a bet that most of us couldn't afford, frankly, to do something like that as it was. But we thought, of all the options locally, we really thought this was going to give us the biggest upside, and obviously, as you know, I mean, it's turned out that way.
And I think one of the things you did speak upon is, obviously the proximity to DC
Yeah.
lends the opportunities for visiting professors or people like experts that really are not like teachers, but they like have work experience to come back and they'll probably be more lenient to teach because they're like, I work in DC, I could teach a class in public policy because I
Yep.
did public policy in DC. So I think definitely that was you did nail it on the head about having quite renowned academics
Yep.
because they do it in the real life. Or maybe a lot of people would be like, okay, I retired in the DC area. Maybe I'll just teach a class or two.
Absolutely. I mean, look, but all over, like you can go all over Mason right now. And it's one of the biggest ways I think alumni have also engaged is because it's not just adjuncts that have done really well in their field and then see Mason and come back, but don't have a prior affiliation. You see a lot of adjuncts that are actually alums that are coming back and doing exactly that.
So I don't know, fast forward or whatever, you're living your career, you're doing your thing. When was it like, hey, there's such thing as an alumni association. Let me get involved or, respond to the emails. I don't know. How did that start? We were like, okay, let me, get involved in this post-college or post-life,
Yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, I think I actually represent a pretty big demographic for us at Mason, right? I didn't have that on-campus experience. I didn't have a university life. All of that for me was in Charlottesville. So here, for most people, we have historically been a place where people do come. I mean, even though we have 6,000 now that could live on campus, we have 38,000 total, right? That means there's 32,000 people that are coming in, doing their transaction, attending the class, and probably gone back. Or maybe they're staying on between classes if they're trying to consolidate that. So I think the mindset for me became, this was the place for me to get my degree and help me progress my career. I then did forget about it. And I think that's one of the challenges we have because we don't have that same experience for everybody that most undergrads, for example, have. And 20 years came and went. I mean, from 1994 to 2014, basically, I thought about Mason every once in a while, but I mean, I hate to admit it. I mean, I know sitting as the Alumni Association president, these are probably not the kind of metrics you want to look at, but I didn't attend my first Mason basketball game till 5 years ago. I didn't attend, and Philip, I'm a huge sports fanatic, right? I mean, but it was a professional sports and other things, and I loved college basketball, but honestly, I kind of grew up early on, as I mentioned, on the kind of the Carolina blue culture.
Oh, shoot.
Being in Chapel Hill for a couple of years.
I can't hate. I love Go Heels. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So that was there. And I still remember that Sunday in 2006 when Carolina got lost. And, I'll take pride on both sides, right? Basically, I'll take pride that it was Mason that beat them. But it was, so I didn't have that. I hadn't attended any homecomings until about 4 years ago or alumni weekends. And I don't think that's unusual because, we have 210,000 alumni and a couple of hundred sort of engage in some of these. And I know we'll get to that a little bit about the kind of things we're trying to do to, start to change that. But that was my experience, which is why I think I can put that head, that perspective, that voice of the customer to really think about how people are. So in my case, it was really the professional intersection. Being a business school grad, one of my classmates was getting engaged in the alumni chapter on the business school side and said, hey, there's some neat stuff going on here. And then he blew me away and said, oh, by the way, I'm about to become the chapter president. I'm like, I didn't even know you're involved. And so he kind of pulled me in. And there was a really neat initiative going on out of the business school called the launch of the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. And because of all that time I spent working with Dad and sort of being seeing him as a young kid, watching him work in that White House commission, or he was also on the advisory board for the SBA administrator during the latter part of the Clinton time. On small business, minority, access to capital issues, all the kinds of things that, underserved communities just don't get access to, and have really, and obviously that's a major part of our current national conversation. But I saw that early on and just loved the idea of small business entrepreneurship and how you can grow that. And I saw this lab and the focus of that lab around student-based campus ecosystem entrepreneurship. It's a lab run by Dr. David Miller. And it just blew me away what Mason's capability was in that space. And so that was like the initial entry point of like, okay, let me get involved in this advisory board and then kind of play around with the chapter. And then it's kind of, and this is my view of the world right now with alumni, all Mason alumni, is you just need that little entry point. Because once you get in, oh my gosh, that Kool-Aid tastes really good. Right?
Yeah.
You see the amazing stuff going on. And that's kind of what I saw and that just kept reeling me in. And so that's only 6 years ago, right? Like I said, graduated 26 years ago, but my journey from the Alumni Association and chapters really only started about 6.
I mean, it's kind of similar, obviously I'm involved with the Black Alumni chapter.
Absolutely.
And I think, I can give you a big shout out. Like, I think that started from the 40 under 40, but guess who sent me the email saying maybe you should apply for this? I was like, I guess so. You did. So it's like, I think you're right about that entry point. I never thought of alumni involvement as something I could do. You always think of like people that are, beyond you, like, oh, it seems so removed, but then you have like a close acquaintance, say come out or do something. Like, for instance, yours was a friend, you were for me. And then that's that entry point. And then you realize, oh, it's just people that want volunteers, like it's not as it's not as intimidating as you thought it was. Like,
right. No, okay. Absolutely.
Oh,
absolutely.
It's like,
congrats on getting on the board now too.
Yeah.
So
but
very cool.
It's very similar to that, like you think, oh, the people are so far removed. Oh, they're super involved. I didn't know how you do that, but then you come to find out it's like, oh, they're looking for committee people and people to get involved, and I think it's lowering that stigma that anyone can get involved. So like, what was like? So as you started getting involved, similar to that, what are some of the things that you like you just said it was just the entry point? What were some of the things like you like ramping up? It was like, wow, like, oh, my friend did this. I didn't even know he did it. Like, what were some of those revelations early on in getting involved in the alumni?
Yeah, I think that was it. Because what happens, and I think for a lot of people, and this is a big part of what we're trying to do in terms of how we move the Alumni Association forward. Chapters often, the school unit affinity chapters, right? Like I know you're now on the board with the Black Alumni chapter. We just launched a Green Machine Ensembles chapter, right? There are a lot of different affinity things. And I think that's sort of, I believe, the first place that you can get engaged, because I went to this school and because I know a lot of other cohort people or other business school people or whatever, it's the first place of sort of feeling like you have a home, right? And for me, there is a lot of stuff in the business school that was going on. They at the same time, soon after that, because I have been in government contracting, there was this vision that. And it's the first of a kind, which we know happens a lot at Mason, a first of a kind center around looking at the government contracting community as a business industry, as a mature industry, not just from public policy or from the perspective of all the legal and regulatory environments that come with contracting with the government, but really the fact that it's a $500 billion mature industry. And so no one's really looked at that from an academic discipline perspective. So it really was, like I said, it was like you get in with a little bit and then the aperture opens a tiny bit more. And for me, the first couple of years from 14 to 17 was mostly about the aperture opening at the business school side. And there was plenty to do there. And frankly, across all our schools and units, you'll find the same thing. And where I really got connected, I think, with the broader Alumni Association was that the year that 16, 17, when I became the chapter president for the business school. And as part of that role, you start attending these Alumni Association board meetings because you are a voting member of the board as a chapter president. That was honestly, Philip, my first exposure to the alumni. Like I said, because the Alumni Association, historically, we're the ones that do everything from the alumni weekend kind of activities to the homecoming and things of that nature. And because I wasn't really a participant in that process, and I was kind of very focused on my career and family and sort of faith, it really at the time wasn't that relevant to me, I mean, and I know it is for others, but just my personal experience.
Mm-hmm.
But getting that exposure, I started realizing, wow, there's some neat stuff going on. So you talked about adjuncts. I mean, one of our most famous, adjuncts is now has a center named after him at the Schar School of Public Policy, the Hayden Center for Intelligence, right? Michael Hayden, General Hayden's been an adjunct and a participant in sort of the Mason ecosystem forever, just sort of like the last couple of years where President Ann Holton was the same, right? She was an adjunct and helping out. Next thing you know, she's our president. But it's stuff like that where you start to get exposure. And then I honestly started seeing about the really cool stuff we do in the music and art scene, which I had no idea, right? I mean, you'd heard of the Green Machine, but when you start thinking about what kinds of stuff comes out to the Eagle Bank, what kinds of stuff is at the Performing Arts Center, the Hilton Center, and the amazing sort of track record we have. I mean, people that have been part of the Hamilton cast, right? Or Washington Opera and things. And that's a big area of personal interest for me. So I think that was sort of what the Alumni Association started to expose to me, was all of the capability effectively that the Mason family can sort of connect to my life, my personal life and professional life. That's where I really started. That now I'm drinking gallons, right, of Kool-Aid, not just a cup.
Yeah.
And but I think, and our hope is, and I think as a team, that's what we can do, right? We can create. Your first point of entry is your alumni chapter, or the chapter you most have affinity with, and then through that open the aperture to get you exposure across the network to other kinds of things. And we never know, like, as you know, the further you get away from your degree, I mean, in your case, you're in your degree field effectively, right? So you're really well connected, but you have a lot of other interests. And the more you move away in life from the time you spend at school, the sort of more distant you get to the actual degree often, right? Whether it's family issues, community issues, or, a lot of people aren't actually in their direct degree field. And so you may have, I met a gentleman the other day who's an economist from Mason, which puts him in the chess school, but his professional career has been around private wealth management and, things like that. And he's now very involved in the Alumni Association side, but his professional affinity is with the business school, even though his school is chess because of the economics degree and things like that. So there's a lot of that you hope to play out.
So what are some things for people that want to get involved, like to lower that stigma? What would be some tips? Like you were talking to someone and say, don't wait till 20 years. What are some things you would tell someone? I mean, like seriously, like what would you tell someone?
Yeah. Well, I would tell you, like, there's a couple right out of the gate. Like, I mean, whether you're a year out of school or 5 years out of school or 10 years out of school, and we talked about adjuncts, but one of the biggest things I think that is available for folks is, and I don't know if people understand like the amount of opportunity there is, to just come back and speak in the classroom, or just come back through, think about career services and everything that is going on with, ability to mentor and connect people. If you've gotten 5-10 years in and you have job opportunities or internship opportunities, I mean, we know that's like the fastest path for career success is getting those early internship opportunities. There's just so many different ways that I would say that start with like what floats your boat, because that's usually how I start. You talked about, your fear, the way you viewed the wall of getting engaged and how it was somebody above your career, trajectory or whatever, and you realized it wasn't. I think that's kind of the critical thing for everybody is you could be a recent graduate who just entered the workforce, and students want to hear from you, right? They want to hear from you, and you are just as capable as walking in. So, whether that's calling back through your professors that you really worked well with and saying, hey, I'd love to, whether it's coming in through your organization, right? And everything that happens from sort of career services and the counseling services and everything that Mason does in that space, that's to me the easiest way, because you don't have to be the master entrepreneur who's done this, that, and the other. People will soak that stuff up. And I think, frankly, those kinds of speakers in the classroom are easier to connect to for a student than maybe me walking in, or somebody else who's 30 years removed from having gone to college.
I mean, you nailed it. You nailed it, because I know a lot of professors will have like they'll bring back formal, like this student was here just last week, last year, and they'll have them do like how to get into the field of communications. I know a lot of my
Right.
professor friends tap in their old students all the time to come back and speak. And then
Yeah. And we
definitely
do
that's
have a
one.
volunteer. If you go on the alumni.gmu.edu site, there is a volunteer interest form up there. And so for everybody listening that is interested, I mean, if you go in there and you just say, hey, I'm interested in this, you don't even have to say specifically what you want to do. I'm just interested in working with students, or I'm interested in, X or Y. There are alumni outreach officers, and I think you know them, but folks like Amir and Leanne that will reach out to you immediately, and they'll talk to you and try to figure out what your personal interest is. And that would be my, the one thing is, you don't force yourself into something that isn't going to be satisfying for you either, right? So just think about the kinds of things that are important to you. I'm almost guaranteed that there's somewhere in the Mason family that there's an opportunity for you to engage.
Yeah, so you talked about it. I mean, that's a good pivot. I mean, engagement. If you didn't know, we're in a pandemic. So, what challenges has that presented? I mean, obviously, you just stepped into your role. When did you get confirmed as the new pres?
July 1st is the
yeah. So July 1st. Congrats. Shout out to you.
Thank you.
But we're in a pandemic. How you gonna address engagement and with this world that we're in?
No, absolutely. Well, it's interesting because I think there's a couple of things that we've started, and a lot of people seem to be engaged. So I'll give a couple of shout outs to some of that. There was we know that, for example, we have amazing leaders in various industries around. I mean, you can think of any industry around the globe, and we have amazing leaders in it. So, we had an opportunity that came forward from the Office of Executive Development that said, hey, we'd like to get, and it came to me because they knew I was GovCon related and I'd help put some panels together. We'd like to do sort of a GovCon panel, and this was a couple of months ago, maybe May, to get senior alums who are in the government contracting industry to kind of speak to how they're navigating COVID, right? And not only what are they doing right now to successfully try to, adapt and whatnot, but what do they think the future looks like? And so we took that idea and connected it to the Alumni Association, said, that's just not about GovCon. And we've now run like 11 of these leading Patriots panels. And so we've had a panel, even in education, we've had a panel on K through 12, and then we've had a different panel on higher ed. We've had a sports and entertainment. We have one coming up, arts and entertainment, art and music. We've had hospitality and tourism, food and beverage industry, right? Yeah, I mean, like I said, you can think about anything industry. And if you go back, and I know we'll put some stuff out about the first phase of this program. We did, I think, 11 or 12 of these panels. And we had great responses. I know you were on a couple of them. So I remember you posting some questions on a few of them. But great response from the alumni community. It was really one of those part of Patriots Helping Patriots, right? These are leading patriots in industry. And if you're working in that industry and interested in it, here's a chance for you to engage with the folks that in that. And so but that's all online. And I think that the innovation that we had to kind of kick into high gear, we would have probably tried to do those as physical panels in the past because that's your default, and maybe done one a quarter. And instead, we got 12 of them in 6 weeks executed because it was online. It was easier to do. And then the same with you may recall last year, we started some things actually with an alumni-owned restaurant in Merrifield, Inca Social. We were doing these third Thursday of the month happy hours there. And it was working pretty well, but obviously with COVID, we had to kind of figure out what do we do online. So we've just migrated that to one end of third or fourth Thursday of the month as bingo and game trivia nights. And, we did one last night, and, we typically get anywhere from, 50 to 150 people, depending on the night and the time zone and other things. And that's another thing we can now do. Last night was kind of geared more towards the Midwest and Western Coast time zone. So it started a little later. But there's things like that I think, clearly for everybody, it's about online engagement. It's the launch of the new Patriots Helping Patriots website, where you can kind of go to one place and see all the different parts of how Mason can help you from a well-being. There's a whole business directory now. So I would tell you, the innovation, creativity kind of kicks in, like I said, when you're forced. And I think that's what's happened now is we've taken some things that were always on the docket, but we got so caught up in doing physical stuff that when we had to do this, those things on the docket sort of moved up, and things like the online website and, you know, things like that. But I think that's a key for people. And because classrooms, we just kind of talked about the way you could contribute in the classroom. Well, guess what? You don't have to come to Fairfax or Arlington or Prince William anymore. You don't have to take a couple hours of your work day to go. You could just take your, you know, a 1 hour break in the middle of the day, get on a Zoom call with a professor for his class or her class, and boom, you're done. And so there are things like that I think are a lot easier too now.
That's dope. Obviously you talked about the online engagement and all these new initiatives, but you know, kind of going back in the time machine, what was one of the coolest things you've gotten to do or be a part of as you gotten connected to the alumni?
Yeah, no, great question. I'll tell you, I think if I think back about the how a series of activities led to probably my coolest thing was, you know, because of the alumni engagement of the business school chapter, and then sort of the overall thing, you know, a couple of years ago, 2017 is when my father had passed away. And as part of that, you know, the just having engaged as an alum now into the community and knowing people, and frankly, my dad's story, given that we came up to Virginia in '74 and, you know, lived along Braddock Road. When he started his company, he knew that he had to add more tickets to his resume. And so he began, and we talked about this too, as an adjunct at Mason. We lived in Burke, so it was easy. But he adjunct in Mason early on when Mason started the computer science and IT programs back in the mid 80s and all that, late 80s. So as he's doing all that, he teaches as an adjunct. He has a lot of students he starts hiring early on. Because, you know, grad students were willing to work and willing to work a little less than maybe, you know, whatever. So he could do that. And so some of his earliest successes as a company in the 80s were actually tied to Mason. And so all that came together, and we kind of worked with, you know, with the advancement team and said, hey, we'd love as a family to kind of honor Dad at this point. And so we're able to endow a scholarship in his name around his story, which was, you know, GovCon entrepreneurs trying to solve big national hairy problems, right? And so we got to put that in play. And what was the cool part of that ultimately was in 18, every year Mason does a scholarship dinner, right, in the spring, where you get scholarship recipients and sort of the donors who have the endowed scholarships get to meet each other and have this dinner. And I got to speak at that as sort of the donor, you know, speaker. And what was the best part to me about that was the ability to take Mason's journey of the last 45 years. I know we're about to turn 50, you know, next year, or 2 years. But, you know, the Mason journey across the 70s, 80s, and 90s, as we became who we are, as we instantiated in Northern Virginia and those founding families, and, you know, President Johnson and Merton's early vision, you know, expanding visions of what happened. With Dad's sort of corresponding story of, and he was a trustee on the foundation too, right? So he had all these little connections, even though he never went to Mason.
Oh,
But
right,
that's
yeah.
the Mason story, right? Like, we are really impactful in our community. And it's not just about alumni. It's the fact that Northern Virginia over the years has been driven workforce and community engagement wise by our story. And you think about it, and Philip, I know you know this better than most. I mean, the way we allow people to come into our university without barriers, the level, and I know we got a lot of problems both nationally and at Mason to kind of work through when it comes to racial, social justice, but we have absolutely been a leader in that. We have our record of social mobility, our ability to have folks that come in that don't have what people going to other schools have, and what, you know, have to work their way through school. We know that we've got a graduation rate. I mean, as an alum, one of the proudest things I walk around with is the fact that we graduate people no matter what walk of life they come from and where they come from, and the color of their skin. We don't, you know, their sexual orientation, we do not care. And we have a system that helps them graduate. And we have a system that helps them graduate at levels as high as, and basically on par with, those nationally that typically, you know, the middle class white American. And we graduate people at very similar levels, and they don't have default rates. We're one of the lowest default rates, which means they're succeeding in their careers. That as an alum is maybe, in my mind, I once again, I throw that out all the time because that's maybe the proudest thing, about it. But that was part of what I thought what I tried to do with that dinner speech was, and why I think it's a cool moment is it allowed my personal and family history of immigrants who've impacted the national ecosystem connected to the Mason story that's done exactly the same thing.
I mean, you nailed it on the head. Obviously the world and all the greater community is not perfect, but I do feel like George Mason is a microcosm of the Northern Virginia, at least Northern Virginia community, with so many diverse people from all over the world. I think I found my niche in the community because it just reminds me, I grew up around here too, similar to you. And so the connection to the Mason is just a connection to Northern Virginia for me. So I do get that feeling. And obviously everything, while there's a lot to work to be done in regards to social justice and
I agree.
Equality and all that stuff, I definitely think that due to the proximity to DC or due to proximity of leaders, we take a lot of risk and we try new things. So at least
absolutely.
You can't fault it. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be perfect, but yeah, that definitely the risk taking and then also trying new things and being creative and keeping up with an ever changing world is definitely representative in the university with new technologies, new offices, new initiatives, all kinds of things. Cause it's just kind of, I think they're young enough to take risk, So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm really excited. I know that with President Washington coming in, it's interesting. We've heard him speak a few times where he talks about everything that was the big ticket items that he was supposed to focus on when he was first going through the interview process. And then he gets the job and none of that is on the plate right now. It's all about, getting back safely. Obviously the task force he announced last week for racial justice and whatnot. When you think about those things, this aspiration that we have, I think is very achievable. As an alum, again, we have a story, and those alumni that haven't read that story, I mean, you can see it on our, the Mason website. The story that we have about access to excellence is so unique in higher education, right? And I think with the new administration that's coming in and the emphasis that is being placed on it is a perfect opportunity truly to put us in the middle of a national conversation on this and be part of that, the changes that we need to make that happen. And that's another charter for alums. If you're looking for a way to make change, Mason has infrastructure, ecosystems, and other places where you can engage to help drive that change nationally and globally.
That's funny too, because you said access to excellence. That's the name of a Mason podcast.
Yeah.
Shout out to hey, unofficial plug because I like it. That's my man John Hollis. He's cool. So I think that's
absolutely.
That's randomly came up. So I kind of lied. I said that we were just going to go to the end of the episode with shout outs and plugs. But if you've listened to my episodes before, you know that we have a segment called Shot for Shot, which you get to ask me any random question. I get to ask you any random question. Do you want to go first or I go first?
Why don't you go first so I can think about it?
Okay, so I see that you got the is that the Nationals or the Stanley Cup? Stanley Cup.
I see a little bit of the Stanley Cup.
Stanley Cup there. So you DMV through and through. I see that DMV Sports. I see all that. Yeah. Obviously, in a pandemic, it kind of unfortunately, sports we can't, go back to, we can't go to. But if you could say right now, I can go to safely masked up, I can go to the stadium or whatever venue. What sporting event would you have to say? I need to just get that. I need to get that live sports fix. Which one would it be?
I would. It would be a DC United game. If I could get to an MLS DC United game, love the passion, love the demographics of people who come to it. As I think one of my personal pet projects 2 years ago was actually doing a Mason alumni night at DC United, and I've been a season ticket holder for a long time, and it's one of those things that it's another part of this thing is. As alumni, we have a lot of different interests, right? And it's not just about how you connect at Mason. It's about how you connect outside of Mason too. How do you work in your communities and all that? And it isn't, obviously, we've talked about demographics at Mason a lot in the diversity and inclusion, inclusive environment we've had. That wouldn't surprise you then that football, soccer, is one of the more passionate, things. And so that was, and we got 400 people to the event, right? And if you remember last year, we were on a national TV game where we even had the Green Machine kind of alumni group that did a cappella rendition of the national anthem. And it was real, and it was live on TV. And it was so cool because I remember friends of mine, because I am a passionate MLS fan, friends from Atlanta and Dallas and San Jose texting me while I'm at the match saying, wow, your alumni group was awesome. So another shout out to Green Machine and what the kind of brand and stuff they get to us. But yeah, I know I probably should say a Mason basketball game or a
no, it's not,
or something. But DC
man.
United.
Yeah, that's what's up. That's what's up.
Yeah,
I went to one MLS game at the old RFK. I have not been to one recently at the Aldi, so I need to check it out. I did go see a soccer game because my father-in-law played soccer at UVA, which is a small world.
Oh, wow.
So I went to UVA versus Maryland game randomly. At the Aldi, so it's awesome. But I definitely gotta check it out.
We'll make that happen whenever we're allowed to again. Yeah. We'll go to Audi Field and hang out at a DC United game.
No, I definitely want to go to. Okay, your question from me.
Yeah. So, so let me. I think I'll just go with stream of consciousness. I mean, your brand is all about the way you positively influence and impact all those around you. I mean, it plays itself out. And a lot of that often is that, and so it's kind of in the same vein and I remember like the first time physically meeting you was at Game Mason, right? And last year in April. And I remember the conversation, and we'd done some, email and other things over the year, but I remember that. And so for someone like you who is looks to be so extroverted and so engaging and so like physically present in the way you do it, how has this impacted you personally? I mean, from a well-being perspective and kind of all these aspects that I'm sure you feed off of.
Yeah.
How have you handled that?
I ain't gonna lie, man. It's been tough, man. COVID's trash. And so, obviously what I've learned and definitely when I started this well-being journey and positivity, it was even in my, like, I was having a hard time, with anxiety and some depression a couple of years ago. And so when I started to think about well-being, I saw it as like me healing myself, right? So like I started reading books and started, taking the science of happiness, and then I realized that like a lot of my personal happiness and positivity had to be habitual, like had to be habits, I had to, give out ill Phil awards or like purposeful things, or I had to make sure I tweet, or, whatever I admit is positive messaging, or connecting with friends and showing appreciation. So I think what I've learned even during this time of COVID-19, while things are very difficult for me, being an extrovert, as you said, is that I had to put in place ways to like overtly make habits to work on my well-being and also connecting with others. So, obviously the podcast, I ain't gonna lie, the podcast has been one of my greatest ways of staying engaged with people, right? Cool. Interviewing people like you, but then also sharing it out and getting comments. I know it wouldn't surprise you, but I definitely once a week, I say, whoever I text with, and I scroll through my phone and I reach out to people and make sure that I'm still staying socially engaged, calling or texting or going out of my way to like be purposeful with still remaining and fostering my relationships. So, nothing's like sitting in front of someone across the table, or, particularly even these podcasts. I love setting up the real podcast with the equipment and the mics in front of each other. Nothing will, for me, replicate real person-to-person interaction. But I just say that, for anyone that's going through a hard time with COVID, is that like, you have to be just like very purposeful with your well-being. Like really, if you're really a exercise junkie, really make sure that you set those times to work out. If you are really like an extrovert people person, make sure, even if it's digital, that you still connect with people. If you like to read and write, just like make sure. It's like, I feel like during this time, it's like a big test. Like a big pop quiz that says, all these things that you do to take care of yourself, are you really going to do it when it's very difficult? And hopefully I'm trying to pass this test by forcing myself to do it. So, Yeah, I mean, yeah, I can't wait for the day to give people hugs and dap
Yep.
people up and go to
No,
real
I'm a hugger too, so I totally get it.
uh I love people so much, like just
Yeah.
being around people, that I would take random breaks during my day and just walk around campus
Yeah.
just with the hope that I run into someone I know. Like my wife was
No,
like,
absolutely.
you're the only person that goes to I would go to that MLS game,
Yeah.
not to watch the game, to hopefully I'll try to count how many people I'll run into. She's like, I don't want to run into people here. It's like you're the only person that goes to a high school reunion hoping to run into people for small talk. Like
Right.
you're
That's
not gonna
funny. That's
you're not
funny.
gonna see these people again. I was like, but I love it. You know what I'm saying? So I love people. I love being around people. I feed off of people's energy. So I just gotta I gotta find a way to substitute it the best way
Yeah.
I can.
No, it is an effort, and I totally agree with that. But
Yeah.
no, that's very cool. Very cool.
Yeah. So we're at the
All
end of the
right.
show. This has been a great
Okay.
show. With that being said, we're at the segment of my show called Shout Outs and Plugs. You get to shout out anyone that you want to shout out and, love, family, anyone, shout them out, give them love. And then plugs, any way where people can follow with you or the things that you're working on, at which I'll put in the show notes so that they can see this when they look at the episode. So
No, I appreciate it.
the stage is set. It's all yours. Shout outs and plugs.
Well, the shout out, I mean, you kind of just implied it. Really, to my, we were just talking about the family. I've got 4 kids at home, and that's where I'm applying my extroverted time to. They're probably tired of it. But a big shout out to my wife, Jaya, who's a Mason alum. My 4 kids, Nilesh, Rohan, Pranav, and Janya. Nilesh actually got a graduate certificate from the Volcano School, and Rohan is about to graduate. He's the one you've met who ran the esports club at Mason and kind of helped with the launch of First Game Mason. But he's almost done with his first part of his Mason journey and about to graduate, working for a Mason alum owned company too. So trying to keep it in the family. But and then really the plug, we're one of the reasons we're here, alumni.gmu.edu for everyone out there. There's just some great stuff for you to research. And in particular, if you go to the Patriots Helping Patriots page, and it goes to, Philip, what we were just talking about your brand and how you try to help people. There are places there for the well-being and all the things that we have that are being offered. There's the career services, kind of mid-career transitions, and the fact that y'all have helped, the career services side has agreed with alums to at least give an initial, kind of career guidance kind of conversation. There's a whole Patriots Helping Patriots business directory now. So I'd encourage every alum that owns a business to put yourself in there. We really want to encourage anybody for us to help each other, right? And that's kind of what this period's about. Is that's when your family and your community, down to your cul-de-sac and your church or temple. This is the time for us to help each other. And there's a lot of resources out there for us to help each other in that network. And I'm sorry, I'll do another shout out because you can't forget our students, right? We exist, and it's one of the biggest ways to give back as alums. The gratification we get for the university growing in stature is because we're all giving back, and we need to do more to students, to research, because we're solving some pretty big problems at Mason. And so I'd give a shout out to really what everyone's done to help with the Student Emergency Fund, and really ensuring that those that are in need are getting the support that they to complete their careers and join our alumni family. So,
well, that was great. Thank you so much. Please get involved. Shout out to the Alumni Association and Mr. President here of that, and also shout out if there's also all the different affinity alumni groups. Shout out to the Black alums. Shout out to the Latino alum, shout out to the Green Machine alum, all those different ones. So as you can see, you can find your own pocket, your own niche to get involved with the alumni. Thank you so much. Please, listeners, share, like, subscribe, share this episode with your family and friends. It's Positive Philter on all the different platforms. If you want to leave a phone number or hotline or voicemail, you can call 571-336-6560. That's 571-336-6560. Connect, share, engage. Thank you so much for being on this episode, and we're out.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you for listening to Positive Philter, a podcast that focuses on family, friends, career, with a little self-help along the way. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your family and friends, and like the Facebook page, Spreading Positivity of Movement. Thanks for listening.